How's it going, everyone? Welcome to my channel and welcome to another Star Wars Jedi Survivor video. Now for today's video, I have quite a few combat tricks that might make your life a lot easier when you're playing Jedi Survivor. There are a lot of abilities and combos that you can pull off in Jedi Survivor, so it's really easy to forget that you can even pull off a lot of these moves, but I promise a lot of these combat tips will make your life way easier, especially if you're playing on some of those harder difficulties. So at any point, if any of these tips helped you out, please remember to give this video a thumbs up. It's greatly appreciated. So jumping into the tips, the first combat tip I have for you guys is pretty simple, but it's to take out the blaster enemies first. It's very easy to get overwhelmed in Jedi Survivor, especially in some situations where you have 4 or 5 melee attackers up in your face. Meanwhile, there's like 5 or 6 other stormtroopers shooting you at a distance. So a good thing to do in every encounter is to focus on the blaster enemies first, because it's a lot easier to take out the melee enemies when you aren't being shot at constantly. And then as I'm sort of running around, all of the melee users sort of bunch up into one group together, and then I take them all out at the same time. So the next tip is a pretty fun one to pull off, and it's that you can actually force pull the shield away from the scout troopers and use it for yourself. So if there's a large group of enemies and one of them has a shield, you can just force pull it away from them. You can use this to shield yourself from oncoming blaster fire, and then when you're done using it as a shield, you can always just throw it and it will do a ton of damage. And the same logic also applies to using human shields. So one thing I like to do is go for the captains first, the guys with the orange pauldrons on. These are the stronger units in the group, and they always have more health, and they normally have more abilities and can do more damage to you, so I like to force pull them towards me and then use them as a human shield for their buddies to do all the damage for me. Because in the Empire, they obviously don't care too much about friendly fire and they will shoot you no matter what, so definitely keep this in mind and use it to your advantage. And then the next tip I have for you all has to do with any enemy type that has a sword or a big stick, such as the Raider veterans. These guys can be a real pain in the butt. They have a jetpack and they have a lot of unblockable abilities. But these guys, along with the BX droids, all have one major weakness, and it's the force pull. If you put some distance between yourself and these guys with the swords, you can simply do a force pull and bring them straight to you. Now, when you activate the force pull, they're going to give some resistance and they're going to act like they're trying to fight it, but then suddenly they're going to just give in and they're going to use this force pull to their advantage, and they're going to try to hit you with a big power swing. But all you have to do is force pull them, wait for them to make that lunging move towards you, and then just do a block or a parry at the last second, and this will do a massive amount of stun to them, breaking their guard and opening them up for a massive counterattack. So anytime I'm in a fight with one of these guys, I always make sure to take advantage of the force pull. So next up is a pretty basic tip, but it's something that could be very easily overlooked. And it's that grenades and wrist rockets are actually your friends. So anytime someone throws a grenade at me or a B2 battle droid shoots a wrist rocket, you can easily just do a force push and send it straight back into their face. This is great for taking out large groups of enemies or taking out big units such as the security droids. But unfortunately, the force push isn't very accurate. Anytime someone throws a grenade or shoots a rocket at you, when you force push it, it kind of just goes back at them in a random direction. Versus if you do a force pull, you can actually pick up the grenades or the rockets in midair and then aim them wherever you want and then launch them back at whatever target you desire. So one thing I like to do is wait for them to shoot their wrist rocket, then I snatch it out of midair and then throw it back at whoever I wish. And then the same logic will obviously apply to the ATST. If you're ever fighting an ATST, you can snatch its rockets out of midair, or you can pick up the grenades off the ground and throw them straight back at it. So next up is a tip that a lot of you guys might be familiar with from Jedi Fallen Order, because it makes a return in Jedi Survivor, and it's anytime you're facing the heavy troopers with the miniguns, if you have the double-sided lightsaber, you can just hold in the block button and you will immediately reflect every single blaster bolt straight back at the enemy. It's a really cool animation to pull off. It's one of my favorite moves in the entire game. I love facing the guys with the miniguns because of it, and there's even a lightsaber upgrade you can get that will reflect the blaster bolts back at any enemies in the area instead of just the guy with the minigun. So I highly recommend you guys get that upgrade, because anytime you see a guy with a minigun, you're pretty much guaranteed to take out all the enemies in the area when you reflect the blaster bolts. shields. So definitely keep an eye out on that ability. So the next tip is a very specific one, but it's when you encounter the Rancor. Now the Rancor is a hidden boss encounter that you can come across, and the Rancor is no joke. He has multiple abilities that could one-shot kill you, and he's a very tough opponent. I died a number of different times before I figured out how to finally beat him, but there's actually a trick you can do to make the boss fight a little bit easier, and it's actually an Easter egg within the boss fight referring to episode 6. Now in the boss encounter, throughout this entire cave, you're going to find a lot of bones lying across the ground. Now you can use the force to pick up these bones and then launch them at the Rancor's mouth, and then the bone will get lodged in its jaw, giving you the perfect opportunity to get in up close and deal a massive amount of damage. Now unfortunately, I was only able to get it to proc like once in the entire boss encounter. I think once you do it once, the boss kind of learns not to let that happen a second time, but you can pick up the bones and throw them at him and it will do damage. So when you eventually make your way to the Rancor, just remember that you can in fact use the bones to your advantage. And you're definitely going to want to take advantage of this because the Rancor is a really tough opponent. And then since we're on the topic of boss encounters, the next tip has to do with the giant scorpions. There are a number of different scorpions that you're going to encounter on Jedha, but fortunately they all have a giant weakness, and it's that you can cut off their claw. Now normally if you're trying to fight the scorpions, if you're using the blaster stance or you're trying to do lightsaber throws or any sort of ranged attack, they'll use their claw and they'll deflect everything you throw at them, making the blaster stance pretty much useless against these scorpions until you get in up close and cut off their giant claw. Once you cut off the claw, they'll no longer be able to deflect your attacks, and then the rest of the boss encounter should be pretty smooth sailing from there on out. So anytime you're fighting those giant scorpions, make sure you focus on trying to cut their claw off. So up next, the next tip that I have for you all is something you can access at any meditation point, and it's the training mode. Now the training mode in Jedi Survivor acts as a tutorial if you're struggling on anything such as attacking, blocking, deflecting, parrying, evading, you name it. This is where you can go to practice those abilities. It's a pretty straightforward and simple tutorial, but for those of you that didn't play Jedi Fallen Order, or for those of you that need a bit of a refresher, just keep in mind that you can visit the training area at any of the meditation points to get a little bit of a refresher on the basics, because this game kind of just throws you straight into things and doesn't really give you much of a tutorial. And then the next quick tip I have for you all has to do with your tactical guide. Anytime you face an enemy in combat and you defeat them, once you scan the enemy, they will show up in your tactical guide, and then your tactical guide will give you tips on how to beat those enemies in the future. So for example, if you fought the Electro Staff Purge Trooper and he gave you a lot of trouble, it will give you some tips on how to beat them in the future, such as they are capable of counterattacks after being parried, remain vigilant, and then the second tip they give you is that they will briefly lower their defense at the end of a combo attack. So at any point, if you are struggling with any of these enemies, go into your tactical guide and see if there's a tip that might be able to help you out. And then the final combat tip that I want to give you guys in today's video is actually based around one of the abilities you can get. Now I didn't talk too much about specific abilities in today's video because I'm going to make an entirely separate video based off of all the best skills and when to use them, but in this video I wanted to talk about the focus sight skill in particular because in my opinion it is one of the best abilities in the entire game. Now this skill is going to cost you 2 skill points, so it's a little bit expensive, but it's definitely worth the investment because what this ability does is lets you hold in the B button or the circle button to automatically evade incoming melee attacks. So ever since I unlocked this ability, my life has been way easier. So anytime someone is getting up in my face, I'll just hold in the B or the circle button, activate the ability, and I will dodge anything that they throw at me. Now this works if you're surrounded and you have tons of melee users around you, you'll just dodge everything they throw at you. And this also works great in 1v1 encounters. This skill was actually how I defeated the Rancor, but the coolest thing about this focus sight ability is that it can actually dodge the unblockable red attacks. So anytime the Rancor was about to grab me and insta-kill me, I would just immediately dodge it, wait for him to get done with his animations, and then it would open him up for a ton of damage. So I actually give all the credit to me defeating the Rancor on the hardest difficulty to focus sight, because focus sight just came in absolutely clutch. Anytime you're facing an aggressive enemy, the focus sight skill just makes it so you're pretty much invincible. Any encounter I'm in, I just hold in the B button or the circle button, I wait for the enemies to finish their attack, attack animation, and then as soon as they're done with their animation, that opens them up to taking a ton of damage. So trust me, get the focus sight ability under the survival tab. It costs you 2 skill points, and it will completely change the way that you play the game. So that is going to do it for all of the combat tips and tricks I have for you guys in today's video. If enough of you guys enjoy this video, then I might make a second one. So be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications. That way you guys don't miss out on any future videos. And that is going to do it for me, everyone, and I will talk to you all next time.